So welcome everyone. Let me introduce our guest. So it's a big honor to introduce Bergdoll. He's professor of art history in the Department of Art History of Archaeology at Columbia University from 2007 to 2019 and curator in the Department of Architecture and Design, Museum of Modern Art in New York. When from 2007 to 2013, he served as Phil Johnson Chief Curator of Architecture and Design, and he served since 2018 as President of Board of the Center for Architecture in New York City and a member of the Pritzker Architecture Prize jury since 2019. And our tutor, great architect, Eric Goldenberg. Eric is architect and principal designer in Monad Studio. He's professor in international architecture in Miami. He's actually studied in University of Buenos Aires and advanced architecture design from Columbia University, New York. He worked with Peter Eisenman, a senior designer for the City of Culture of Galicia. Also, he worked with Hani Rashid. And the last guest is Monika Mitášová. She's theoretical person in our faculty of Bergdoll, and she also works as an academia in Czech Republic, and she published very interesting books of Mies and Jedicek interpretation. So welcome everyone, and let's start talk about Mies.
Thank you. I guess I'll try and see how far I can make Barry speak about this amazing article that I read in the Mies in Berlin catalog, especially the piece that focuses on the very interesting relation of the two almost parallel, right? Projects, the German pavilion and the Villa Tugendhat. But I also wanted, before we get on to this fun stuff, to share a little bit of what we're trying to do, what are our first instincts, and what is somehow the setup of why we wanted to do a project here. I was invited by, anecdotically, I was invited by Jiri recently to, in general, to do a workshop, and when I heard the word Brno, it's like, yes, Villa, you know, I mean, amazing. I was in first year of undergraduate many years ago in Buenos Aires, in the University of Buenos Aires, and the culture in the architecture culture is all completely about Le Corbusier. But when I saw myself, when I discovered the Villa Tugendhat, I was completely enthralled by it, and I did not understand why. I have no idea why, beyond the liking of the beauty of its geometry, as per the plans. I did not comprehend then why I liked that. What was it in those drawings that has something different? I was used to, I grew up in a family, and Barry knows this because the MoMA also hosted the show in Latin American architecture. I grew up in a family of architects whose work was also exhibited there. And it was always about anywhere from Le Corbusier to Archigram and the range in between for that generation. But Mies, to me, has been always some sort of, I see now as a hidden treasure personally. And I'm fascinated by the things that it's allowed me to associate. And I certainly wished that I had been more attuned and more curious about Mies when I was compiling and editing and writing my book, Pulsation in Architecture, it dates to 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago. And now, personally, moving to another work, just another group show, another group book called Feedback, is that I'm extremely thankful for the invitation and for the possibility of becoming much more aware of the ideas. And just to go directly to some of the aspects, I'm extremely attracted to the discovering the relationship to Heidegger, and to the fact that one of the first things that's attractive to me is to discover that the program for the Villa Tugendhat was a spiritual program to some degree, beyond all the necessary pragmatic and prosaic things of a house. The Grete and her husband wanted to, they challenged a brief that would address, as per Heidegger and Guardini, an active commitment to the natural environment as the way to pave a personal human awareness. And this is already, I would say, that's the spiritual program. And that's sort of, I wanted to begin to unpack some of the thoughts in this project regarding some of the comments that also Monika was making about how interesting the situation with the landscape is in more than one way, even that it's also part of the state of the parents with a completely different house. So I wanted to also tell Barry that this project that we're beginning to work on is considering eurythmics. And I was also, to me, it was kind of mind-blowing to discover that Mies was interested in these theories of rhythm. And Dalcross and was trying to start our students for them to tease out possibly what are eurythmics diagrams that one could envision, one could project into the geometries of the house to understand what would be the movements and in what ways the choreographed and non-choreographed life can begin to tell us some stories. So this is just to put something on the table, let's say. And the idea is that in 3 days, we will do sort of like a very short charrette and discover what is the possible scale or possible location or series of locations in and around or outside of the house to, it's a tactical game to discover some of those things. So I would love to, if you don't mind, I would love to put an image, maybe just to get us started, which would be this one. And Barry, please tell us absolutely everything.
What is this from? Is this from the international style?
I think it's from your article, but it's probably from that, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's quite...
I have the book here. You're making me go back.
Yeah.
You're making me go back 20 years in time.
Correct, 20 years, 2000.
Which...
I had just moved to New York when that show and the other one were on, yeah, at Whitney moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is how the whole fascination with the garden started, when I realized that I can't move my arrow on your screen, but when I realized that both of these plans were redrawn when they were published in New York in 1932 in the inaugural exhibition of the Department of Architecture at MoMA, the one that coined the style, the term, the international style, which was so influential, but so were also the way all those buildings were depicted. You know, Mark Wigley and others have written about the fact that all the color was removed by the fact that we saw a world of black and white architecture. And so suddenly modern architecture became white. And even when you travel to Brno, you discover all sorts of extraordinary colors in the architect. I mean, you discover many things. First of all, you discover that the Tugendhat house is part of an incredible, an unbelievable explosion that Brno is, was one of the most experimental cities in modernism in the late 20s and in the 30s. Tugendhat both stands apart, but is also part of a whole effervescence. Then you discover that some of the work, like the work of the contemporary Fuchs, is red and is other colors. And so you should realize that this book eliminated colors. But what I suddenly realized was that these plans were redrawn, that they're not plans that were drawn. They're based on plans by Mies, but they were simplified for publication. And one of the most important simplifications was the removal of evidence that the planting of the landscape in the immediate perimeter of the buildings and by extension into the larger setting had also been, in a certain sense, airbrushed out, or we would say today, photoshopped out. So that, and that began my reflection. What does that mean if you take away those marks? If you take away those marks, you take away the relationship between interior and exterior, you take away the relationship between building and planting, between building and nature. And so my whole research and exploration and reflection in that exhibition project with Terry Riley 20 years ago was on this aspect that the garden, the plants, the relationship, what passed from one side of the glass wall to the other was incredibly important for Mies and had been removed from our thinking of him.
I think that's quite cool, and to think that also how important it was to the role of technology and mechanization as a means, from Mies' standpoint, from what I understand of your article, from Mies' standpoint, because he was very critical of the way in which mechanization was evolving, the society being altered, appropriated, applied at a massive scale, that he aspired for it to be more of a means to access spirituality. And in that regard, then these two mega panes of glass that are mechanized to completely disappear, and all of a sudden you have the fishbowl is not such anymore. All of a sudden this is a terrace, and the birds sing inside, or the air moves through. So I'm kind of very interested also in this aspect of the high-tech sort of the specific idea in mind for it, not just completely different from the high-tech that we've seen in other eras of architecture. Continue to see.
Yeah, that was when I traveled there. Well, not the first time, because I first went there in the end of the 1970s when the house was being transformed from one function to another. And the work site was open, so I sort of broke in and walked around the house, to the absolute horror of my Czech friends who had driven me from Prague to Brno and were scared to death that I would, of course this was communist times, and that the police would come and that we would all be in terrible, terrible trouble. I think we had also not registered the fact that we were in Brno for the day, and so my police registration was in Prague. But anyway, then I was just so excited to be in the house. I don't think I took in much about it other than the fact that it was empty and so on and so forth. But when went back for the first time with Terry as we were beginning the research for the project, and was able to walk through the house that had been through some restoration then. I think it was still sort of vaguely in the transition from having served as a guest house for the mayor's office. Is that right, Monika? For the mayor's office of the city of Brno. The thing, just to experience the architecture in situ is so startling. One thing that's was so revealing is that we don't generally study this house in section, and this section is what's absolutely key. So you get in the books the upper floor plan, and then this one, which is the lower floor, the living floor. Of course, famously, the functions of the house appear to be reversed because you actually come in at the upper level. But it's that trip, that voyage, which is incredibly important. And what I had never understood, and is not really, it's also, I think, interesting for people in a workshop, that when you look at photographs, you see what the photographer saw, you don't see necessarily what you're going to experience. So once you've had the experience, you can find the experience again in other people's photographs, but you can also understand why you had such a revelation. So what was the one key revelation for me was that when you arrive at the bottom of that very, of course it's generous when you're in it, but relatively tight space of the staircase that descends to the lower floor, and then you spill out, the incredible way that your vision, is sort of like Robin Evans's wonderful article about the Barcelona Pavilion, because Mies's floor to ceiling height is surprisingly low, like this, out towards a glass pane. And that was one revelation, was this kind of almost force field as you're suddenly released and your vision goes to the glass wall. The other is, I had never understood, maybe I hadn't paid attention, I had never understood that the glass wall in the rear doesn't all descend, that it descends in two distinct parts, and that those two distinct parts correspond exactly to the straight wall that divides the living room from the study and to the curved alcove of the dining room. So in a certain sense, the other wall of these implied rooms is the piece that can be removed. So you have this kind of ability to raise or lower the, for want of a better word, the fourth wall of an implied space. So those were the two things that just completely stunned me when I experienced the house, and after its first, sort of its first post-communist restoration, and when it was possible to visit again and with some furniture there, was just astounding. You know, and then there's so many other things that you can't read on either of these plans, which is you can't really read the material palette of Mies, and the way we were all taught it as undergraduates. The material palette was very simple. It was metal, glass, primarily metal and glass, to which one should probably add plants, with the fascinating thing, particularly for the Tugendhat house, that very typical of Mies's plans, the furniture is drawn in place. So he designs this furniture that in theory you can move around, but it's so heavy it's not so easy to move around. You know, he actually literally draws the furniture onto the plan. You know, Corbusier does not do this in the same time period. Corbusier's furniture is a kind of, you know, is an objet type that you're meant to pick up and move around, and you can bring in your own things, but Mies has done the whole world. But the other thing you don't see about this material palette that was so striking to me in both buildings is that glass is never just glass. It's all different types of glass. It's frosted glass, it's clear glass. It's, you know, he is as careful about picking the types of glass he's going to use and where he's going to put them as, in collaboration with Lily Reich, he picks the type of fabrics. You know, what color are they? What are they made of? What is the weave of them? What, and then, as you were saying, Eric, what, in this case, how are they going to move when the house is opened, when it moves from being a kind of hermetically sealed box with, in the case of the Tugendhat villa, this incredibly sophisticated heating and ventilation system. I mean, this house is a mega mansion. There's make anything in Miami look pale by comparison. It's one of the most expensive houses of the entire period. But when you open the glass, clearly you let nature in, and then these different materials are going to move in different ways. So the richness and the subtlety of the material palette, where no material is singular, even famously the I-beams, which are, depending on where they are plain, are clad and reflective, you know, that they're conjugated differently, and that one half of this lower floor plan, it's not the lowest floor because there's a whole service floor below this, one half of that plan is actually service space, which is behind a milk glass, translucent but not transparent wall. So anyway, those are just some thoughts on that plan. And also, I suppose it's not very nice when we're all together on Zoom to say that you have to go see a building before you understand it, because the representations that it give you could create certain false readings or false expectations, or let's say insufficient ones.
No, I was just thinking as you were saying about this difficulty, right? This being remote, literally. And actually, somebody else had said something about it. It was Hilbert Seimer. He literally, I'm just going to quote, says, at least from my bad translation from the German book of Terry's that I have here, it says, he said, photographs cannot give an impression of this house. Not even drawings, but just even photographs cannot give an impression. You have to move in this room. Its rhythm is like music. He says this rhythm is so strong that small changes are insignificant. And to me, that's, I was hearing you say these things about the surface for certain reasons, but perhaps I'm projecting more than there is, but it seems to me that in all these different kinds of surfaces, in all these different kinds of reflectivities, and some less reflective, but even things that are not meant to be reflected are made of chrome. It's about also presenting opportunities for these reverberations. Like nobody told you material palette of Mies was also the sunrise or the sunset in the onyx, right? Just an amazing fire that all of a sudden it becomes that. And I think that there's all of a sudden, if you, not that I'm sort of into phenomenology, but I think it's quite extraordinary to see that there is on the one hand, this interest in the accessing through the surfaces and through the technologies vested in the surfaces, a kind of spiritual sort of state, a heightened state in relation to consciousness and awareness. And at the same time, we have this interest in theories of rhythm and seeing that the materials can contribute to almost state of being high or being drunk, I guess, through all of those amazing effects that you would be, immersed in. I haven't been, so I don't know. I want to go.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting ones I'm just occurring to me from this discussion, not something I've written about or even thought about before, is if you're just taking the practical brief that's given to the architect by this young couple who were given this piece of property, which is at the end of the garden of their parents' house, but in fact uphill from their parents' house because their parents' house is down below. So they're given the top of the garden, which as the house is pushed practically right up to the street, which is not really depicted obviously on this plan because we're one level below. But the street is really right at the top, it would be parallel to the top left corner of the plan there. So the house is hard up against the road, but it also nearly fills its site left and right. So there are houses on either side, left and right, and therefore you don't want to look left and right. So you've got a house that's all about looking in one direction. It's looking towards a garden, and of course famously from the upper level towards the view of the city and of the castle in the old town, the other side of the river. But the thing that I'm just thinking about for the first time here in our discussion is that if you're standing in any part of the great room in summertime and the windows are open, or springtime or summertime and the windows are open, the trees and bushes outside are moving in the wind, particularly the weeping willow, which is a tree that moves a lot in the wind because it's got very, like
soft and bushy.
The arboreal equivalent of long hair. So that would be moving a lot. And then, but if you look to the left, you can't see the property next door because you're looking into a densely planted, potentially densely planted plant conservatory, where the plants are between two sheets of glass and there's no wind in there. So they're in an airless space. So you got to kind of almost like you have the compressed minerals of the onyx wall, and then perpendicular to it, you have the compressed plants of a greenhouse, kind of, yeah, conservatory.
I wonder, what do you have on the left and to the right? What is there that is never part of the view?
What is there on the site?
What are the properties on the sides, or is there something beyond the trees that's being hidden? Another property that I see relevant? Or?
Yeah, there's a house on either side. You know, and the houses are fairly well closely placed to one another. When you see the street view, you can see that actually Mies is just putting a line in the street because all the other houses have tall roofs and they're more, you know, traditional houses. I don't know their actual dates. Maybe Monika could tell us. I don't know the date that this is a kind of inner city suburb. It's not really in the heart of the city.
Yeah.
What's the name of the district? I think it's called something like Chernopola or something like that.
Yeah, there are villas all around, but what you've mentioned about the garden is really important because it's clearly composed in a way that when you open the wall and when the glass part goes down, it is really almost a pavilion open to the garden. So yeah, it's positioned in a way almost like a camera or something like that, because you really want to see the space downhill and the view of the city. Unfortunately, I have to leave for a while now, but when I'm back, I can share the garden drawing, or if Jiri has the picture, then Jiri, please share it, because in the book of dealing with the garden, there is this incredible drawing of the whole site, precisely as Barry says.
That'd be interesting to see the whole context, the whole environment. There are some interesting, to me, contradictions, but not contradictions, like beautiful paradoxes in something you were saying earlier also about how, of course, you know, these pieces of furniture are almost as good as columns, or as good as, you know, they could have been beams or you know, fixed part of the infrastructure of what makes the house stand, but it's actually just furniture. And so there is all this also deliberate positioning, also on the terrace of the, what do we call this? Also the other hemicycle that it's in the terrace looking out, the upper level. The way in which what is being orchestrated is the sort of potential social interaction in these spaces, and where is the privileged view from those spaces out? All of that is kind of like engineered almost, right? How do you access? What would your body position be? What are the range of possible experiences you can have? And then there is life, but also, so there is this very choreographed, I don't know if it's the right word, but this kind of potentially, in a way, constrained possible choreographic experiences one can have. And on the other hand, all I'm hearing from these descriptions, even yours, is that you get that sense from all of the drawings and all you know about the house. But then there are the rhythms of the things that, or what they call the rhythms. Maybe rhythm is such a generic word, there are better words. What is the psyche, being exposed to the experience of passing through all these moments that were meant to be affixed, and your potential experiences were meant to also be affixed. Maybe you were meant to be pinned down also to the furniture, but you don't. And in the process of moving from one to the other casually, you apparently had this amazing sensation of being in the space, in the moment, in time. To me, that's why personally my motivation is trying to tease out and understand how is this house about time, or how it's about time to figure out that aspect. And to me, it's about time because of pulsation and feedback and all these references to music. And we're lucky to have in the group of students several musicians. I'm not one, but I'm fascinated by music in architecture. So there's this kind of interesting paradox of fixity or affixed pieces of the architecture versus the liberating, to me, of what can happen with the body in the space and the mind in that moment. I don't know, just offer this thought.
No, I think that's absolutely right. It's the most, you know, I'm not exactly a phenomenologist myself, but it is the, you know, it is the most palpable thing about this house, is that it's a kind of observatory for watching the course of the day and the seasons. In a way, it's a forerunner for Mies's statement about the Farnsworth house, which is one of only a handful of houses that he builds in the United States, when he says, you know, and there it's complete glass box, and he says, one sees nature in a wholly different way from inside the Farnsworth house. So it's not as though being in a glass space is totally transparent. You know, there's this notion that by looking through glass, and particularly by looking through glass that's framed above and below, that you're completely changing your own perception, even if one of the things that you're looking at is the spectacle of time that's happening outside. So, you know, there's that time, there's the time of seasons, there's the time of light, there's the time of change of the cycles of day and of, you know, and of nature. But then there is the whole choreography through the space, as you say. I mean, I think the reason why the Tugendhat house is so incredibly important in the life of Mies is not simply because here's the first time some incredibly mega wealthy client appeared and he can do whatever he wants. I mean, the budget of this house is absolutely mind-bogglingly enormous. But it's not simply, you know, lots of architects get a really rich client, often it leads to a disaster. In this case, there was such a sympathy that on the philosophical interests of Greta Tugendhat and Mrs. Tugendhat, on her connections back, as you mentioned at the very beginning, to the Dalcroze Institute, to fascination between philosophy that's not only philosophy of consciousness and of the mind, but also of the body, and all of the experience that she'd had in that institute for the study of eurythmic culture, where Mies's wife had also studied at a Brun. So, and Mies had hung out there, and Mies knew that work. Mies knew the work of the very innovative stage designer Adolf Appia, who had worked with Dalcroze. So there's that whole culture of the immediately before the First World War around Hellerau in Dresden, which is a connection between the client and the architect. So, you know, we have some evidence in that in the text that you'd quoted.
Yeah.
So that also makes this house such a fascinating one, because we have very, very concrete and partly documented intellectual relationship between the client and the architect.
I was interested also in what you said about directionality before, in light of these comments. As well, there is all these, or there's a few of these valves that make you transition first from the street. It's kind of like almost non-appearance of the house, and then all of a sudden you take this kind of hinge stair downwards and you see the piano. Then you turn right and the whole landscape opens up to the horizontal things. And then you keep rotating a little more, and there is another hinge, something else. And also before you did all of that, there's that moment where that valve that releases all of a sudden the view into Bergdoll's, what is the name of the, well, you know what I'm talking about. And I think that there's this very interesting way in which one, well, there's the kind of internal sort of clockwork of the everyday life, the life of the rituals, right? The protocols and the rituals of the life of a couple or a family, but also there is a projection, the way the house absorbs and projects, which I think is very interesting. Potentially also for us who are considering, or at least in my mind, considering the notion of a stage. And you just mentioned also the group of the Eurythmics and that project of the state. There's a picture of because it's in German, I couldn't figure out everything. There is that picture of in one of Lacrosse's it's a representation of a stage of a performance. So there is a certain.
Oh, in my the picture in my article.
Yes.
Yeah, that's I just have it here. I'm looking for it. That's a stage designed by Appia, who I was just talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm kind of curious because one could. There's all these interesting connections that immediately come to mind, and the house itself, all of a sudden, it's looking towards the garden, but it's also being looked at. I guess you yourself said it's also at the back end of the site where it's almost like, okay, we give you that little plot, do something there, but that thing is, you know, turning its head back and taking the most advantage of the view of that garden. And I was thinking of how, you know, in theater design directionality, unless we talk about other architectures which have superseded directionality, such as Sharon's Philharmonic, but the presence, the directionality, the sense of stage, even though this is house, it's domestic, I think it's really, it can be a critical, interesting device to look at the house.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to think about that, one thing I would add to it is that this is a house for entertaining. It's also a party house. So, you know, you could do all sorts of exercises of diagramming or coloring the plan to think about the shifting roles of what's public and private for different types of occasions, and even when the house is in use in the daily life. So first of all, this is very typical of many of the famous avant-garde houses of circa 1930, which are actually very traditional in is that there's a world of servants there. So this is not a world in which what we think of as the 19th or early 20th century concept of servants has been gotten rid of in favor of a very efficient type of living. There is a whole army of people working behind the scenes in this house. So there are, if you will, they're stage hands. There's a whole apparatus of what you don't see in a theater. And then there's the very dramatic fact that because of the house being built into the side of the hill and the decision being made to put the reception rooms on the lower level, you actually enter a vestibule, which is immediately in front of the most intimate part of the house, which are the bedrooms. But then you have to have a disincentive to go there, and you don't experience the entry floor except being in a translucent box and then going down this staircase. And so you go from this very tight space on the upper floor, and then that release that I experienced, that I described, where the first view is not of the living room, because you see the way the wall works, that it shoots the view right out to the garden. It's as though you have a kind of implied corridor across the main living spaces. And then you can, then of course, immediately your eyes can move around, et cetera, et cetera. And so lots of parties took place here. So you have to imagine the place, how it would have worked for people who are coming to dinner, or what kind, we don't, whatever we know about the entertaining of the Tugendhats. And of course, I hope you've had access to a copy of the book that Daniela Tugendhat did, the youngest daughter of the family, in which she published in English and German. She published family photos of life there, and which tells us that the father's name, I can't remember the father's name, was it Eric? No, I don't know, the father, Tugendhat, was an amateur photographer and an amateur filmmaker, and he even had a darkroom in the floor below this for developing his photographs, and even I think for developing the film camera, but he liked to film his parties. So then also I think you bring in, even into your fascination with movement and choreography, the role of cinema as opposed to still photography. So you could say theatrical frames, or you could say cinematographic continuity or montage. But he liked to surprise the guests by, after it got dark, and so the garden would fall into darkness, there was a screen for projection that could be pulled down. And in this back area, you see the kind of
James Bond.
Yeah, there's a projection room back there in that poche at the back of the top of the plan. Is the possibility to project out on a screen that would be pulled down in between the onyx wall and the ebony alcove to provide suddenly a movie screen. So the place could be turned into a rather unconventional cinema. So that's yet another element that's not much discussed, because I don't know that it's fully studied or understood.
Maybe, Eric, may I share the photo?
Yes, please.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yes. You have to stop sharing, actually.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's fascinating what you are saying. I was so lucky that I was in Villa a couple of times, and it's amazing experience. But always when I visited, I found some kind of new aspects of this. And our last kind of tour was like a year ago, actually. And then I found this kind of spot, and maybe this is the projection room. And it was fascinating because everything is kind of well planned. Everything
there
is,
you go, yeah.
Yeah. And if you look right, it's amazing space. If you look, left, it's amazing space. And then I saw this, and I found it kind of really calm space when I really can be kind of intimate. And it was fascinating for me. But because they did reconstruction like 2 years ago, I think, and this screen is missing. So then we are not able to read it as a projection room.
Right, yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's any archaeological evidence of that. That information comes from Daniela Hammer Tugendhat's book. So, yeah. But in theory, you could open that door and be projecting from inside there.
This should be the projection window for a camera.
Exactly, yeah.
So then it's even the projection is oriented outside, because the villa is really oriented to the garden and everything is planned in this view. And when you tune in kind of unexpected view, you find out some kind of new perspective.
So, there's a curtain that comes across that long glass wall at night, because I don't know that there's any evidence that they had type of what the lighting was in the garden or the lighting on the back wall of the facade. So unless you somehow wash the wall with light, as they say, it's going to just become a world of blackness at night. And so hence that the third transformation of the glass wall is to cover it, floor to ceiling drapery, and internalize the world. And then in a certain sense, you could project a different world there. I mean, I suppose you could. I don't know. I'm not a historian of cinema, so I don't know what kinds of films a wealthy person could get to have access to show a movie, but showing his own movies and
the home movies.
The home movies, so you would have the weirdness where you were showing a movie of the house in the house.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit different than showing film for my trip to Rome or something like that.
Which people used to do, right? People used to get together at home when I was a child.
Oh yeah.
Come from trips and invite friends to
come over and watch these little movies.
You have so many photos now and nobody watches anything of anybody else's.
But yeah, but I think that's the world of movies after the Second World War. I don't know what the status of somebody having equipment for making their own movies was in 1930, 1931, 32. I mean, of course, that's the other very tragic and poignant thing about this house is that they didn't really live there for very long.
Yeah. I wanted to also add something because it's not clear to me. It's difficult to see from the photos what the curtains do, the different kinds of curtains that are, and I couldn't help but think of Madeline Rissendrop and Rem's Skull, and they're on down to all the houses with their curtains.
Yeah,
and I was wondering.
Well, not even so much Madeline Rissendorp as Petra Blaise.
Petra Blaise.
Yeah. Which is why when Terry and I did the show in 2001, we had a kind of interpretation of the silk, velvet and silk cafe that Lily Reich and Mies did, in which Petra Blaise took part in designing that. Yeah, I mean, from the drawings, this house is so well documented that, exists the. I didn't talk about in my essay or study the role of the fabrics here. That's a whole nother dimension, but I think we can certainly know a great deal about what they were before they were removed.
Especially even that the Tugendhats were in textiles. Seems
yes,
like
exactly. That was another connection. So textiles are incredibly important in Mies because so many of his clients were in textiles, and so many of them were in kind of, I suppose you could call them experimental new technology textiles, and knew one another through the German Werkbund, which made these types of alliances. So also all of the clients immediately before this that were wealthy, the Esters and the Lange, they were in textiles in Krefeld because Krefeld was a huge in the Rhine was a huge center of textile production.
That's cool.
Particularly silk.
I think that we are taking on we already are heavily interested in this idea of the textiles and the looms and the spinning mills and envisioning these kinds of things that are not the house, but there are also mechanisms. Just to tease out our designs, but that's a separate story. This is so cool.
This is an extraordinary photograph. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting. When I was there, and I was wondering why the sofa has different colors, and they explained that the leading to the green on the back, in the glass. So the sofa is green because the background is also green. So also all material coding or color coding in the villa, it's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Is this your photograph?
Sorry?
Jiri, is this your photograph?
Yes, this is my
wonderful
thing.
Yeah.
It was yeah, like you said, that the experience to be there, it's amazing. And last time it was kind of strong for me, everything was planned, everything was kind of attention by architects. And then I really would like to kind of heard about the Heidegger and Mies. It's completely new for me, this kind of thoughts.
There's something about that. There's something that's also in the piece, Harry, that when you talk about how these avant-garde sites for experimentation in the garden houses, I thought that was so cool because there's these uh, also in the comparison between the German pavilion and this one, I find that there is a significant difference in that the pavilion was almost like these ideas in a sort of temporary urbanism setting, because all these valves and these disincentivizing, to quote your word just used before, were about the other pavilions that were right next to it, the Spanish, whatever, and how the use of the walls to direct the space was also there to focus also within that space. This is our space, focus here, right? And to also, so much, you probably can spend too many hours that we don't have on this, that you don't have, but and already I'm thankful, trust me. But the way in which the sort of reversal of the pocket, all these ambiguities, the way they play out in the German pavilion, the way they play out here, there are nuances that they are different.
I think these two projects are radically different from one another. For me, the Barcelona Pavilion is the culmination of a series of projects about sliding planes and passing through, this way. That's already there in a series of houses built and unbuilt throughout the 1920s, whereas this is a very different conception of space. And it partly, as you say, because the Barcelona Pavilion is a very urban concept. And the Barcelona Pavilion is really a propylaeum. It's a gateway between two places. And you can enter it from either side. So you pass through the Barcelona Pavilion. But here, yes, of course, in fine weather, you could pass through and you could go out onto the terrace and go down the stairs, to be sure, in the garden. But many times you would just come into this space and move around in this space. And it's a very different organization of space with this play between the planar wall and the curved form. Is completely different language from the Barcelona Pavilion.
And the kind of transit there would be, right? The number of completely different too for whom it is. Yeah. Well,
I mean, there's a clear front and back to this building, and there's a clear progress from road to garden, whereas the Barcelona Pavilion is ambiguous because you could come into it in either direction. Either you're going from the fairgrounds towards the Spanish Village, or you're coming from the Spanish Village back to the fairgrounds. So it's really a gateway that works in both directions. There have been any number of Mies symposiums where almost a fist fight breaks out over which is the front side of the Barcelona Pavilion, because there is no real front. It has two fronts. Or two backs, if you prefer.
Yeah, and also I'm trying to find the entrance floor, because what is also interesting that you are not able to reach the garden without going into the living area, actually.
Well, there's a service stair that goes down the side. Outside, on the garage side, outside. But there's no access to the garden otherwise from the interior on the upper level.
Barry, in the world of scholars, how do they regard the sort of, talking about consciousness and awareness in a non-spiritual way, between Mies and Le Corbusier and Maison Garge and that terrace with the stair and maybe other things they would build here on the top? But that's also connected to Schinkel and Behrens. So, but there's Behrens. in common.
Yeah, I don't know if that, yeah, there's barons in common, but I don't know if that many people have thought about these themes philosophically with Corbusier, but I know more about Mies than I do about Corbusier, but you know, to what, since you're interested in time and rhythm, you know, I don't know if it was Corbusier a reader of Bergson, I don't know. Certainly he was interested in the cinematographic, but in terms of consciousness and spirituality, I think it's a different set of references.
There's this project by the core in the, it's not so documented, but it's known, part of Chandigarh, which is the Tower of Shadows.
Oh yes,
It's quite
actually, yeah,
it's
amazing.
It's a clock.
Not for myself, I acquired when I was still at MoMA a model of it that's now in the collection at MoMA.
Nice.
There are actually multiple copies of it because there was a carpenter in Chandigarh who worked for Corbusier, so there are multiple copies of many of the models that he made, but there's a very nice one in MoMA.
I guess he was just playing around with the ideateurs, the visuals, and all of these devices with no program. The only program is the light.
Yeah, exactly.
So cool. I mean,
all right,
this is how we do all our architecture.
It's like a loge primitive hut in which you don't have to live.
Yeah,
I would just say, it's just. Unfortunately, I have a meeting in Mexico City in a minute,
it's
which
12.
is what.
It's perfect.
Yes, it's 11 in Mexico, but 12 here.
But it needs precision.
So, but this is the thing about Zoom. You can go from one country to another without leaving your chair.